This is a 2000 Audi A2, and it's my Audi A2. Well, technically it belongs to Cars and Bids. We bought it to make some fun videos with it over the next few months before we sell it on Cars and Bids. But I've always wanted an Audi A2. This was never sold here in the United States. We imported it from Europe. Now it's here, and now I have one, sort of. Anyway, today I'm going to review the Audi A2 and show you all of its quirks and features. Before we get started, are you ready for your next cool car? Sell your enthusiast car on Cars and Bids. Trading in your car to dealers means you aren't getting market value for your car, leaving you with less cash for your next fun car. Just look at our recent sales of these cool cars compared to current trade-in value. This is a trade-in offer, and this was the Cars and Bids result. This is a trade-in offer, and this was the Cars and Bids result. This is the trade-in offer, and this is the Cars and Bids result. Get started now on carsandbids.com. Sell on Cars and Bids and join the best community to sell your enthusiast car. All right, time for the quirks and features of the Audi A2. And in order to talk A2, which came out in 2000, we first have to go back to 96 and the Mercedes-Benz A-Class. This was a radical new vehicle from Mercedes-Benz, a subcompact entry-level model for this luxury brand that signaled they wanted to go after more sales in sort of this kind of low-level car. And Audi saw the success of the Mercedes A-Class, and they decided they wanted a piece of that action too. And the result was the A2, which came out in 2000. Now, while the A-Class had a kind of funky, weird, kind of quirky design, the A2 went in a different direction. Audi designed this car to be sort of more modern, more avant-garde, sort of more like art than the quirky, weird A2. And beyond the style of the car, the most interesting part of the A2's design is undoubtedly its construction, because this car was primarily aluminum in its construction, which was completely unheard of back in 2000. It used Audi's aluminum space frame technology, which is noted on this little plaque when you open the door. You can see it here, Audi space frame, announcing one of the special things about this car, building it out of aluminum. Now, these days, a lot more cars are made from aluminum, including the Ford F-150, one of the most popular vehicles in the world. But back then, it was unheard of. In fact, this was the very first mass market car ever to be constructed using primarily aluminum. It was a really huge deal. And the reason they did that was to keep weight down. Aluminum is lighter weight than your traditional steel, and for an economy car like this, lightweight is important for efficiency, simplicity. In fact, this A2 weighs only a little bit over 2,000 pounds. Despite having 4 doors, back seats, a trunk, it was impressive, and it was about 400 pounds lighter than the equivalent Mercedes-Benz A-Class. The problem, though, is aluminum was simply more expensive to develop, to build, to repair, and as a result, the A2 was more expensive than its peers to buy, which resulted in not so great sales. And despite the attractive looks and the cool aluminum design and some other fun quirks I'll mention, the A2 wasn't a big success, mainly because of its price point. And after only 5 years on the market, Audi pulled it off and never replaced it. There have been a lot of Audi models in the 25 years since this car came out, but there has never been another A2. Now, there are many interesting quirks and features to the A2, and I'm going to show you all of them, but undoubtedly the quirkiest quirk, at least on the outside, is accessing the engine, the powertrain. It's a little bit more complicated and unusual than in virtually every other car. So you go into the driver's footwell and you can see there's a latch here to pop open the hood like in most other vehicles. You pull it and it doesn't pop open the hood. Instead, it pops open this little black panel in the front of the car, which is intended to look like a grill with the Audi rings on it. It pops open this panel. You come to the front of the car and then you open up the panel the rest of the way, and that gives you access to a few engine components. Specifically, you can add oil. You stick your hand on this little loop and then you pull out this little filler neck and you can add oil here, which is pretty trick. You can also add washer fluid. Same deal on this side. Stick your hand on the loop, you pull out the filler neck, you add washer fluid, pretty cool. And in the center, there is a dipstick that you can use to check your oil. This little access panel was all that Audi really intended most people would generally need when servicing their A2. Washer fluid, oil, dipstick, it was all accessible and pretty easy. If you needed more than that, there was a little more work involved. Specifically, you had to undo these fasteners. You can see one over here on the left and then another over here on the right. These fasteners were what held the actual hood panel in place. And when you removed the fasteners, you could then remove the hood, but it came off like an actual body panel removed from the car. It wasn't like hinged like every other vehicle hood. Instead, you pulled it off, you completely removed it from the vehicle, and that's how you had access to your engine in the A2. It was certainly an unusual situation, although I kind of like the idea of an access panel for the most basic stuff that you can need, and further access beyond that if you want. Kind of cool. Now, this particular A2 has the most basic powertrain that was offered in these vehicles, which is a 1.4 liter four-cylinder that made only 75 horsepower. It is not exactly a muscle car. More powerful A2 models did come later, but they are not yet legal to import into the US. A car has to be 25 years old, and those powertrains came in like 0203. Obviously, it's not 25 years yet. So this is one of the only A2 models we could get legally imported to the US, and so we've done that, but it is not a particularly exciting engine. Now, the A2, in terms of powertrain, was particularly famous because of the 3L version. This was a very specialized A2 that could get the fuel economy of 3 liters per 100 kilometers, which translates to about 80 miles per gallon. An unbelievable number back in 2000 before widespread hybrid car use, especially in a car with 4 seats, 4 doors, a car this size. The way Audi was able to make the 3L A2, it had a specialized kind of low power 3-cylinder diesel engine, and it didn't have much else. Air conditioning was removed. There were lightweight tires and wheels, lightweight materials all throughout the interior. They cut down weight, they cut down everything to try to get to this 80 mile per gallon target, which they were able to achieve. But it required a lot of compromises, including an automated manual transmission specifically tuned for fuel economy. Most people wanted nothing to do with making that many compromises, and so the 3L A2 is a very, very rare car, but there are some of them out there getting incredible fuel mileage even today. By the way, another interesting A2 powertrain drivetrain quirk, all A2 models were front-wheel drive, which is a big deal because Audi's big selling point, their big marketing thing, and all the other cars was Quattro, their all-wheel drive system, which was at least an option on every other Audi in this era and going back years before. But the A2 was never offered with all-wheel drive. It was an Audi you couldn't get with Quattro. Seems mind-blowing, but that was the situation with the quirky A2. And of course, there are many more A2 quirks and features worth covering. Among the more notable is its overall design. The look of this car, I always felt, was really fantastic. Just a very beautiful and kind of a very special modern look, especially considering when this car came from, the late 90s, when automakers were trying to decide between boxy and swoopy. This came out with kind of a totally new thought on how a car should be, with sort of a more modern, edgy, kind of purposeful design that you just didn't see in that era. There was a lot of Audi TT in the A2, which was pretty cool for a little compact, entry-level hatchback to have in that era. It was a special design with some special design touches, like, for example, the fenders, which previously in car design were kind of minimized and not allowed to shine. In this car, they were these big things, these round fenders that were intended to really be part of the look. Another special trait of the A2 was the headlights, which weren't just kind of placed in front front of the car, but rather had the same arc as the front of the body, the style of the car, and that made them kind of integral pieces into the actual look and overall design, the shape, the profile of the car, rather than the fenders and the body lines doing all that work. It was kind of cool. And I always loved the rear glass. You can see it sort of split into two sections, the upper and the lower. This became popular later in a lot of other cars, most notably the Toyota Prius, which did the same thing. But the A2 came out with it first, this kind of bisected rear glass with the higher and lower section. It was a pretty cool idea and a neat way to kind of finish off the end of the car, giving it a teardrop shape without the teardrop having to come all the way down in the back, which would rob headroom and cargo space. You still got the teardrop, but you got this bisected rear glass that allowed you to be more practical too. And truthfully, it's not that surprising that this car had such a special, forward-thinking and interesting design, because it was designed by Luc Donkewolk, who also created the Lamborghini Murcielago and a lot of other big hit car designs for a lot of car companies over the years. But the A2 was another one of his projects, and it came out, I think, fantastically, particularly for a compact car where it's hard to inject a lot of style and excitement given the practicality and size constraints that these cars often face. Another interesting quirk of this car on the outside, by the way, is the windshield wiper situation. You can see there is just one single wiper, but it's huge and it's mounted on this dual post windshield wiper arm setup, which I guess added strength for high-speed driving, not that you'd ever do it. It was kind of a necessity, a single wiper, in order to cover this large, steeply raked windshield. That was another interesting aspect of the design of this car, and the wiper went along with that, and its dual arm sort of looks like what a supercar might have, but it is no supercar. Now, another interesting quirk of the A2 is that it was very Audi. Not only was the design very Audi, it looked like the TT and other Audi models that were emerging in that era, but this car had a lot of familiar Audi touches. The wheels, for example, look a lot like what you had on the A4 from this era and various other Audi models. You can see the badging in back, A2 with 1.4 on the other side, was just the exact same badging that you had on other Audi vehicles from this era. The key, interestingly enough, this car has power remote locks, and the key was just like any other Audi key that you might expect to see on any other Audi. And this was also true on the inside. Get inside the A2 and one look around, you can see a lot of familiar Audi stuff, including some pretty high-end materials in a vehicle at this kind of entry-level price point and segment, which was unusual for its day. Audi at this time was known for its really high-quality interiors, and that carried over to the A2, which had a similar and a purposeful interior design and used a lot of the same materials and a lot of other familiar Audi touches. For instance, take a look at the gauge cluster. You can see basically just a regular Audi gauge cluster from other models with the same little time and date readouts, odometer, etc. That was also true everywhere else you looked. The steering wheel was borrowed from other Audi models, you could tell. Even the turn signal stalk had this kind of substantial, purposeful Audi stock feel, as did stuff like the headlight switch and the power locks. A lot of this stuff came from Audi. And I mention that as important because it was actually a pretty big selling point for this car. This wasn't just intended to be a compact car, but rather a premium compact car. And indeed, by giving it Audi recognizable stuff, it made people feel like they were in a nicer compact car than getting a Peugeot or a Renault or whatever else they could have had. The A2, with its Audi look on the outside and its Audi touches on the inside, it felt and looked like an Audi, which helped to separate it from its competitors. With that said, even though this car, for the most part, was not really decontented like you might expect for an entry-level car like this, there were some things that were kind of A2 specific where it was clear they were trying to save money. For example, if you look on the driver's door panel, you can see two power window switches. Indeed, those are merely for the front windows windows, they were the only power windows. In back, you had crank windows. So the front passengers got power, the rear passengers were stuck with crank. And how about the fact that the driver door has a power lock-unlock button? A pretty cool feature for a car from this era in this segment. Power locks with the remote, but it was only for the driver. The passenger side does not have that power lock button. Only the driver could choose when the doors were being locked and unlocked, which was kind of funny. Also, how about the minimalist sun visors? You drop the sun visor, you can see you don't have this like large kind of fabric piece. Instead, it's very thin. Which was weird. I don't know if it was weight savings or money savings or what, but you also had this rather strange visor mirror that sort of comes down from this plastic panel where it lived. And when you brought it all the way down, then the light turned on from above. It was a little interesting trick solution in this rather quirky visor setup. And next up, here's another interesting A2 quirk, the cup holders. Like a lot of Audi models from this era, it had push-out cup holders from the center control stack. You would push, they would pop out and kind of display a cup holder where you put your drinks. Individual ones for driver and passenger in this car, pretty impressive. But I find it hilarious that they went to the trouble of integrating those complicated cup holders there rather than trying to figure out some spot in the large and mostly unused center console where you might have been able to put drinks. Of course, the other big drawback of these cup holders in this location is that when the drinks start to sweat and condense, they would fall all over your radio head unit and your climate controls. Not the best spot, but an interesting Audi quirk from the era. Another interesting and rather inexplicable Audi quirk over on the passenger side of the dashboard, you have a grab handle, a pretty serious one that seems like it's really screwed in there tight, not moving out. Your passenger grab handle. Why would a car with 75 horsepower and no off-road capabilities have a grab handle? We will never know. Another interesting Audi quirk, the fuel door release. A lot of cars, it's like a little button or a lever somewhere in the driver's area. Here, it's a button mounted on the B pillar, sort of facing backwards toward the driver, but from behind. That's how you open the fuel door. Rather interesting and odd placement there. And then there was the back seat, which, as you can see, is pretty cramped. For a tall adult, I have the seat where I would sit up front, and I don't really have a lot of space back here, but it's not that bad. Like, I can get back here and sit, which is actually pretty impressive considering this car is only 150 inches long. In fact, this car is 2 inches shorter than a new two-door Mini Cooper, but they managed to fit 4 doors and like acceptable seating room inside that really, really small footprint. Actually pretty impressive, even though I'm a little cramped back here. One other impressive thing that they did, a very clever use of space, if you look closely, you will see the front seats are not actually mounted on the floor of this car. Instead, they are mounted up higher. All parts of the front seats, including the seat rails, they're up a little higher, which allows for rear passengers to have a little more foot room. And by giving me that extra foot room, I can kind of extend my legs a little bit more and get a little more comfortable in back. It gives a little more space back here for more comfort. That's actually a pretty clever little trick, mounting those front seats a little higher than you'd expect. Aside from that, however, the rear seats are a very no-frills area in this car. You have crank windows, like I mentioned, not power windows like the luxury people up front, and other than that, you basically don't have anything. There's a tiny little storage cubby back here at the back of the center console. I will say I do like the mounting position of the 12-volt cigarette lighter style power outlet. You can see it's here. It's between the front seats, but it's mounted far enough back that rear passengers can have access to it also in order to charge their devices. Now, it would have been nicer to have like a rear outlet and a front outlet, but that was never going to happen in a car like this, and so this is what you get. One other interesting thing about the A2, there's only 2 rear seats, so 2 seats up front, 2 in back. You do not have a 5-person seating capacity. There is no middle seat. There's just not enough space. So it's a pretty small car and relatively small interior. No surprise. And next we move along to the back of the A2, where there are quite a few interesting quirks to mention, starting with the rear design. Now, I mentioned before that you have this sort of split rear window, the upper part and the lower part, and it's split, which does seem to be the case when you look at the car from the outside. But if you open up the tailgate back here and you look at the rear window from the inside, you will discover that that central spoiler, the rear wing that bisects the windows, it doesn't actually split the window into 2 pieces. The rear glass glass is all one piece, curved to go from this sort of steep rake to this more vertical piece at the back of the car. The rear spoiler is merely held on with, I guess, some very strong adhesive, but it doesn't actually split the window into two pieces, which means you have kind of a radical and interesting piece of rear glass on the back of this car. Definitely adds to the weird, quirky, distinctive factor. Now, when you open up the tailgate in the cargo area, you can see, for one thing, one of the world's smallest cargo covers. It's only about 6 inches wide or deep, but it does cover up the cargo area. And when you open it up, you can see actually a surprisingly large cargo area back here. The cargo area goes really low in this car, which gives you a pretty decent amount of space, considering that you already have a fairly decent amount of space of passenger room, and now you got some good cargo space, again, in a car that is only 150 inches long. It really is clever packaging here. Now, when you lift up the floor back here, you can see the battery is mounted in the back of the A2, along with a few other tools and various other pieces, tire sealant. There's no extra storage under the floor, but you do have access to all that stuff back here. And you also find another rather interesting quirk of the A2 in the cargo area situation. If you want to fold down the back seats, the first step is really easy. You just kind of pull on this plastic tab next to the seat, push the seat down, it's folded, and you have a lot more space. Most people will probably stop there. But if you want more space or a flat floor, well, you can do that, but there's a little trick to it. You go around to the side, and there's a handle at the back of the seat, sort of at the back bottom. You lift up on the handle, and then you can fold the seat forward to create a flat floor. But the weird thing here is the seat will just kind of flop back down unless you set up this seat prop. Almost like a hood prop in a normal car, there's a prop for the seats so they don't fall back down, so when you have them folded, you have a flat floor back here. The irony is this car doesn't actually have a hood prop because the hood itself lifts off the car, but they still have props in here for the rear seats, which is not something you see all that often. Anyway, the other thing you're probably wondering about the A2 is, why? Why did I go to the trouble of getting this? You're especially wondering that if you are a European viewer. You have seen these cars around for many years. They are not special or exciting to you. But I will say that they are special and exciting to me and us, Americans. We never see this car. It was never sold here in the United States. I've seen a few in Mexico, but here in the States and Canada, there was no Audi A2. So it's always been kind of a weird novelty for us, kind of like how the Ford Mustang is common to us, but a novelty to Europeans or people from other parts of the world. It's a similar sort of thing. Now, the A2 import process actually started a couple years ago. I was in Mexico City walking down the street, and there was a pretty nice one parked on the street. And I took a picture of it, and I thought, you know, I kind of want one of those. I had imported an A-Class about a year before. It was a disappointment. I sold it right away. I hated it. But I thought, you know, the A2 would actually be pretty cool. So I sent a message over to my friend Rami at Inbound Motorsports, who found this car. Shout out to Inbound Motorsports. Thank you, it's beautiful. I sent a message to my buddy Rami and I said, hey, if you happen to come across an A2, I might be interested. He said, okay, do you want me to go looking for an A2? I said, no. If you stumble upon it. So a couple years later, he sent me a message and he said, hey, I found the car. If you're gonna do it, I know you don't want any more cars, but if you're gonna do it, this is the one. It's the right color, the right wheels. It has air conditioning, power locks, both of which are pretty hard to find. It's US legal, super low miles, only about 55,000 miles on this car. If you're gonna do it, this is the one to do. And I said, all right, let's do it. And especially it made sense with cars and bids because we could import it, pay for it, have some fun with it, do some quirky videos. And then Crazy Nick, my friend Nick, who you can check out his YouTube channel in the description below, he decided at the same time that he would import a Fiat Multipla. And it just so happened to work out that both of these cars were found at the same time, brought over on the same boat, and we now have them together so we could make fun videos, which are forthcoming. Prepare yourselves for some A2 Multipla content. But for now, let's get behind the wheel of the A2 and see how it drives. All right, driving the A2. At this point, I've spent probably about 70 miles in the A2, and I have to say my experience is, well, it's a little underwhelming. Things I like about the A2. You know, I imported a Mercedes-Benz A-Class a few years ago, and this is a much better car than that, which makes sense because the A-Class came out about 4 years before the A2, so the A2 is more modern, better put together, and honestly, I think Audi used nicer materials in this car, which was one of the downfalls of the car. Like, Audi made this almost too nice, and it was a great compact car for the money, but it was just way expensive to produce. And so this is just a much better car. It drives better, it steers better, the materials are nicer, the shifter is less vague, like everything you press and touch and look at is simply better than what it is in the A-Class. But the drawback is, like, ultimately, and the reason that I got bored with the A-Class and quickly sold it, and the reason that I myself did not purchase the A2 or did not really go looking for an A2 is because I learned with that A-Class that as cute as some of these like weird European cars are, like the A2, like the Multipla, like the A-Class, they're not interesting. They're not exciting to drive. And once you've normalized the design, which Europeans all have, seeing these cars all the time, there's nothing really redeeming about these vehicles other than, you know, they get good fuel economy and they could park them in a city. But that's true of a lot of cars you can just buy in the States. You get a Toyota Prius C. But nonetheless, for the novelty factor and the fun of making some videos with it, I'm glad we have this A2. I think it's cool. I've always wanted to experience it, and I'm glad we did. But the experience is not particularly exciting. Now, going back to the well-built thing, like, yeah, driving this car, it's like surprising to me considering that this is a 25-year-old European compact city car, which are kind of known for being used up and, you know, spit out in Europe without much effort given to preserving them. This one came from Germany, where people are a little bit more focused on preserving their cars, but even still, it's hard to find a car like this. These were not cars people saved. They're not like Ferraris or Porsches. And so it's nice to see this one in nice shape. And so you get a pretty good idea of how it would have been back in the day, and honestly, it drives pretty well. It's tight, it steers pretty tightly. Like, it's not a sports car by any stretch of the imagination. I read some review of this car where the reviewer called it a hoot to drive. I totally disagree with that. I do not think it's that. I don't think the handling is that sharp, etc. But it is tight. The car does not feel that vague. It does not feel that body rolly. It's a nice little car. The real letdown for this car is, of course, the powertrain, the 1.4 liter gas 4-cylinder. This was the least powerful engine in the A2. There was a 1.6, I think, which came later that had another 25 horsepower, but those cars are not US legal yet. But generally speaking, I would say I am surprised at how reasonably well this car drives for what it is. It is not fun, and it's not exciting. It is not worth spending big money on or waiting for an importer, going through the process, unless you are a company that can justify it for content purposes. But if you are, like, it's kind of a cool vehicle to do. But the fun of the car is all in the novelty of the experience. The fact you have the only one in the States, the kind of weird look of it, the fact that, you know, you look at it and you're like, that doesn't make sense. You know, the cuteness, all that. Like, it's definitely, the fun of it is not wrapped up definitely in the experience or the feel, even though it is a pretty solidly well-built car that drives reasonably well. It's not an enthusiast car by any stretch of the imagination. Obviously, Europeans are going to laugh at this. They saw these things for years. A lot of them are off the road now. But it's like, that's not a special car. But, you know, context matters when it comes to fun cars. You know, Europeans go crazy when they see a Mustang or a Challenger, and in the States those are common cars, and it's the same kind of thing. In Japan they go crazy for a lot of American stuff. It's the same kind of thing with this. You always kind of want to, you know, you want to know what you don't have it, you want to know what it's like. What are they getting over there? And with both the A-Class and the A2, the answer is it's nothing particularly exciting, but it is still nonetheless worth, you know, giving it a shot, seeing what it's like, just to kind of satisfy the curiosity itch. And now I'm driving past a row of windows, and I look at myself in the windows in the mirror reflection, and it's so cool. It's like, what a cute little ridiculous thing to have here in the States. It's a fun little novelty. The fun will wear off after a few months, but it is in fact fun, even if it's not actually fun from a driving perspective. And so that's the Audi A2, the weirdest modern Audi. There are so many interesting, weird, quirky things about the A2, including the fact that now I have one. Get ready for some fun videos coming up with the A2 and with Nick and his Multipla. And for now, it's time to give the A2 a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 42 out of 100, which puts the A2 here against some sort of similar cars, although I haven't tested many actual rivals since we don't really get cars like this here in the United States. The closest competitor is the Mercedes-Benz A140, and the A2 scores higher, which makes sense as it's better built, it drives better, and it's newer. Still, aside from the novelty factor of having an A2 in the States, this isn't exactly an enthusiast machine, but it is a neat car.